Wow, we got a good turnout. Isn't that cool? Is Caesar coming?
No,
Oh,
No.
yeah, did you call back in?
yes. So Sundays and Mondays are his busy day.
Which,
He's out of Delano. Don't, it's one of the two that works over there. Which one is he, Tom Valley? Or me?
I just did the state prison.
Yeah.
Is
I always have to
delay?
ask
Oh,
which
okay.
one, I
Can you
can't
check on
remember.
you too?
I think it's one.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, please.
Okay, all right, we'll have to call this meeting to order. Looks like I have an identical piece here.
Yes, that is identical.
Okay, we'll call the meeting to order for 3 o'clock on April 12th. And we'll have a roll call. We have members here with the exception of Councilmember Lopez. We need a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve as read.
I'll second.
Okay. We have a motion and a second.
Councilmember Espinoza,
Yes.
Givens,
Yes.
Alvarado,
Yes.
and Prout.
Yes. Public comment, anyone have public comment? No. Unless Cody has something. No. Okay, so we'll move right into our manager reports and meeting with council members or congressmen. Did we have something first? No?
I'm here mostly to listen, and so I was surprised by the formality of it. Been trying to get around all the different city councils and county suits to just talk about what the needs are and what the issues are, just trying to get caught up mainly. So I was hoping mainly to just have a conversation about this community in general, what your needs are.
Well, the reason we haven't posted is because of the Brown Act and everything. So, we'd rather not have to.
That we already tried.
And all we had to do.
All the way up.
What was that?
No, I just asked, I might really.
I know, I'm sorry.
See if there's something
Okay. Okay, Gabriel, you want to start out?
to do. No, go ahead. Council, this was a request by a congressman.
Yes.
And
Yeah,
so, we are having an agenda, people, council in terms of getting an update, maybe start with an update, what's happening
that's
at the
great.
federal level. That probably stimulate some questions, kind of what Congress do. We appreciate the efforts done with the rescue money. I know that that'll help us cities backfill some of the impacts. There's good or more, but we'll take what we can. So maybe just an update of what's happening back at the federal level.
I mean, right now they're starting the infrastructure conversations. We'll see what direction that goes. I know that's one that most communities are very interested in. And obviously we want to get input from our communities. That's one of the reasons I came out, getting around as much as I possibly can. Wanted to get an idea of how things are going as far as constituents, honestly, people who are struggling to get their bills paid, the utilities the city provides, any input there, kind of what the backlog is, who hasn't been able to pay, what the plan is for the future, where your infrastructure needs are, how is that coming along, and obviously anything else you might want to talk to me about.
You know, before you go any further, do you know what this bill is going to entail? What is infrastructure in their office?
So they've,
Because I've seen a variety of things, I've heard a variety of things. And you smile, you know what I'm talking
oh,
about.
no, I'm very familiar with that conversation. So some are broadening the definition of infrastructure quite a bit, more than most of us are used to, and depending on how you look at it. Some are saying about 6% is actual real infrastructure. Others have come out and said somewhere in the 20s, and I've even had some that say as much as 37% infrastructure. But again, that depends on your definition of infrastructure. But obviously we know that, at least in my opinion, what infrastructure is your roads and highways and rail, and those types of things, water projects. Those are all things that I'm obviously very interested in. I represent a lot of communities that are really struggling with water infrastructure, not just wells, but also treatment plants and even pipeline. And so that's something that the Biden administration is talking about. And I'm hopeful on that there's some opportunities there for us here in Central Valley, because there's obviously desperate need. Also, sewage is a big deal. Hopefully that includes that. But as far as what that actually entails from the president's point of view, the president has sent out basically not talking point, but a top line agenda what he wants in the bill. But there isn't any legislative text as of yet. So once we have a chance to see the legislative text or understand what's actually in it, we'll have a better insight as to what the opportunities are for Chapter, for example.
Do you know if they're gonna earmark certain pots of money for small cities by population on other bases, or is it all one pot and then everybody competes?
I assume it's gonna keep going down the same path where by population, obviously by demographics, the way it normally works.
You talk about water, and that was one thing I was gonna talk to you about was the water situation. There's, with California and the Sigma responsibility that's taking place, I think it's difficult enough as it is to try to corral all these various groups, whether they're dealing with agriculture or us municipality. In Kern County, we have a seat at the table with the local Sigma group, which is fantastic. But we're still only one voice, and we're still a small voice compared to what agriculture is. But something that just recently came up was this idea that the State Water Board is now looking at climate change to dictate how water is going to be allocated to these various groups, more or less just ignoring everything that we're doing with Sigma, which again was already hard enough as it was. And it's probably going to put more constraints on disadvantaged communities. Do you have any plans with water? Any thoughts with water and what's going on here in California? Are we going back to where we started or plus worse?
So, yes, I have lots of thoughts on water. So water lots of times is very important to me. But we also play a role at the federal level. And so legislation like even mine that would extend the WIN Act so it would allow some opportunities for us to apply for grants, things that have actually been helpful throughout the state already. It's something that I personally have worked on. As far as the direction the state is going, obviously I have no role in that, but completely understand the problem that they're creating. Especially right now, we're seeing allocations that were at 5 now down to 0. And a lot of that has to do with salinity levels in the delta and the fact that they're trying to keep saltwater intrusion from into the delta from becoming a worse situation. And that's why we're seeing them continue to draw down on our allocation. We'd be in a lot better shape if we had started years ago with some infrastructure. We had built more reservoirs, expanded. And there is some expansion here along the eastern side of the valley as we speak right now. There's some projects that we're improving the seismic retrofits along like Isabella and what used to be called Lake Success is now the Schaefer Reservoir. Those are all things that are important and making sure that they can handle the earthquakes will allow them to even fill them up, and some of them are actually expanding capacity a little bit. So those are positives. Is it enough? No, we need to do more. There was a big that train.
I want the passenger train.
That's fine. So no, there is more opportunities for expansion. Honestly, Sites Reservoir up in Northern California would be one that's helpful for the valley in general because it allows more flexibility in moving water south and to be able to store water because it is an off river type facility. So it's not one that actually would impedes the flow of the river. It's actually one that gets pumped up over to the side and held, and it allows a little more flexibility to make sure that a lot of the regulations that are met with water temperatures and others. So science is a good positive one for us. There's been also Shasta. They're trying to raise Shasta some, and there's a lot of pushback obviously from the governor on that. But that will be very helpful for us as well. But I think we need to do more. And so that will hopefully WIN Act and give us some more flexibility. At the very end of the Trump administration, we should try to get a few projects in. He's able to get some projects approved that helps us here in the valley. Hopefully those stay in place and continue to move forward and get funding so that we can continue to move us in the right direction. But without some good common sense policy as far as protecting mileage opinions that the president had implemented at the end, or not the very end, but he pushed when he signed the executive order October 2018 inside the record decision on February 2020. Those would have been helpful had the governor not gotten involved in how to sue those. Current those would be implemented. But even with those, in the dry circumstances that we're under, situation we're in right now, even the mileage opinions would have been helpful for years to allow us to build up some more reservoir capacity with ultimately we're in a dry year. And very understandable that we're going to have some tough times. But that's the purpose of building reservoirs, is to help us weather dry winters like this.
And I understand the dry year, the idea of preparing to move out and trying to learn what the market state has. I understand that. I'm not not a huge advocate for the push that California is giving for climate change, and I'm hoping the federal level is not going to be as bad as California is. But it feels like the federal level, there's so many Californians taking the lead on the policies at that federal level. It's concerning, right? I think climate change could be a very real thing, but to the extent that we're forcing it, I don't know. I think we're sort of stuck. It's just going to start hurting communities like this. You know, I'm thankful for the community we're in. We have our own wells, we run our own system, we do a pretty good job with it. But I don't know how many cities our size, even larger than us, who are capable of doing that right now. And so I know for any disadvantaged community, it's going to just, that pressure is going to get put on. If we feel that we're in drought here, it's just going to get worse for other people who don't have those opportunities.
Yeah, no, I've been meeting with a lot of locals, and the well situation in a lot of our communities is pretty bad. And so we know what they can get, but surface water coming in is ultimately the best solution. And as long as our state is restricting that, it's a real problem.
When is that gonna finally change? I mean, we've talked about this for so many years, and it's nothing, it's just not there.
So, I mean, the WIN Act actually helped us a little bit when we passed that at the end of the Obama administration. It did give us a little more flexibility than Delta on the federal side. But as far as the state side, obviously, we take a change of leadership in the state to really have an impact. Because even with the biological opinions, had they been implemented, that would help the federal funds, so the state's response would have been reducing some of their funding to compensate for the increase on the federal side. So it still isn't an overall goal. The goal is not to hurt one while helping another. The goal is to help all of our communities equally as much as we possibly can. The state has not been the most friendly on that front, obviously.
So you don't have any other answer for us?
Well, the answer is we are building infrastructure. We need to build more infrastructure. We need to build real and actually increase the numbers by quite a bit. The little bits that we're doing on some of these reservoirs is helpful, but it's not a solution. We need more.
The water, the reservoir you mentioned to the north, is that Valley Water is the Pacheco Reservoir?
The Sites Reservoir?
The Pacheco Reservoir?
I know, I mentioned Sites Reservoir. That one's up actually north of Sacramento. And that's actually a pretty large one. I was there when the secretary was there, I want to say 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. And they were pretty excited about the project moving forward. That was something that the Trump administration actually helped us expedite here at the end. And that was helpful.
What other one besides sites?
I mean, Sites is the major one. Expansion of Shasta is very helpful.
That's right.
And then the two here in the valley, Schaefer was one, and Isabella both had needs because seismic retrofits make sure it can handle earthquake. There was some concern there that wouldn't allow them to fill capacity. And so once they're repaired and done, I met with the Army Corps of Engineers for an update on the project. I'm hoping to get on the person personally, but their goal is to get those up and going, especially this year being a good year. There's less water loss, and work a little bit quicker, start your season a little bit sooner in getting to the reservoir and do the work they need to do. The goal is to get that done as quickly as possible. So as soon as we have some rain, we have somewhere to capture it.
Another year.
I wish I could make it rain.
I know. Someone said April's still here, maybe we can get some more in April.
It's going to be 100 degrees by starting next week.
Well, and that was one of the reasons why instead of canceling the 5% allocation, they just delayed it. With the delay, that allows for, if we do get April or May rain, it'll allow them to continue or the opportunity to let the water move forward. Where if they just flat out canceled the 5% and made it a 0% allocation, legally they wouldn't have the ability to send us water in because they were trying to close that door. And by delaying it, they left that door open.
I see where some people wanted to push the fact of that emergency deal with this, which isn't really helping to do either.
You're right. I mean, emergency situation could still be helpful because there are a lot of opportunities to capture water. And obviously the state right now under current regulations will always err to the opposite side of what we would like them to do. And hopefully in an emergency situation, they would have a little more flexibility and actually move in our direction and actually move some more water than they normally would.
Because Costa's been there for so long, is he going along with all of this? Is he pushing the same or how is he?
I mean, Constant's got a few different pieces of legislation as well. I mean, as far as the Wind Act extension, he's got language as well on his water bills that has that. But we've worked together on a lot of projects. But as far as the perspective of building a lot more and moving a lot more water, I think that's really more towards the park units myself, making sure that we're a little more aggressive on the waterfront and some others.
Those plans that you're talking about, building a lot more and planning and all that, how far is that away?
I mean, that really depends on, I mean, take Temperance, for example. Temperance was one we talked about forever. And they've kind of backed off of it because to build, when the Fed or the state studies a project, they have to be able to make sure that the owners spend efficiently. Maybe they'll take a long time to do it. But if you're going to spend $3-4 billion on an infrastructure project, and because of the regulations like the San Joaquin River Settlement force you to divert a certain amount of water down the river for environmental purposes, it obviously makes the project less feasible because the amount of water you would be able to capture has been sent down the river and building the infrastructure makes more difficult. So they've kind of backed away from that because of that. It takes a lot of change on the environmental regulations that impact the amount of water and how that water is used to make some of these projects more feasible. And so that's why they're back away from that one. But Sykes Reservoir's been on the books for a long time. There's a lot of water up there, and there is a lot of opportunity there. The ones here along the east side of the valley, like Isabel and Schaefer, both have opportunities for more, and those are just expansions.
What percentage of water is going through the delta into the ocean? What do you guess?
And when you, what percentage of, I mean, 100% of the water moving through the delta, that goes through the delta, but as far as water that could be diverted or water that, I mean,
How much of it is going back into the ocean?
everything that they don't pump goes back into the ocean, but as far as percentages, it depends on how you calculate it, because, but is there a lot of, the amount of water that we would actually need, those pumps that we use now, federal and state, the amount of water they can pump to be turned up all the way is about 18,000 cubic feet per second. And there's times that you're running 200,000 cubic feet per second through the delta. And depending on the environmental regulations, I mean, if there's turbidity or if there's too much dust floating around, I think the scientists will say that it confuse the fish. They hide in the clouds of dust in the water with turbidity so that the predators can't catch them. And that's again one of the things that we've struggled with over the years, because the goal is to protect this delta smelt with baby salmon. Is if they're going to chase clouds of dirt or clouds of dust in the water to stay safe from the predator species. The world predator is largemouth bass, and largemouth bass isn't native to the delta, and it's sometimes introduced for recreational purposes. And so one of the things in the legislation we introduced in the past was actually to increase the take limits on those so there'd be less predators so that you could actually protect the fish. So if you ever went up to the delta and spent some time there right by the pumps, they've got a fish screen, and then another, I don't know, 400 or 500 yards away from it is the actual pumps. And they'll always say that if they get past the fish screens, the fish will die. They'll get sucked up by the pumps. But if you're actually there in person, you'll see lots of people fishing between the fish screens and the pumps off the banks, because a fish will be small enough to sneak through the screens and then sit there long enough to grow to a decent size where fish when they're trying to catch them. So that tells you that the fish screens, one, aren't working, and two, fish a lot of times aren't getting sucked up because they're living a pretty decent life right there growing. And that's something I've personally seen while I was there.
Okay, let me ask you the question another way. What percentage of it would we need to help us with our life?
I mean, it just depends on the flow of water. If there's 200,000 flowing through it, cubic feet per second, and pumps take 18,000, it's less than 10%.
And there's still friction on just even talking about that.
Yeah, and there were times where there would be a storm coming, and you knew that there was a rush of water moving in, but it would pick up a lot of the sediment in the water, and it would create that turbidity, that cloud of dust in the water where the fish would hide. The fish were trying to protect, and so they would actually turn down the pumps in those situations to make sure that they didn't suck any fish up. And those would be the opportunities to actually move water. But if the fish are doing that to hide from a predator, I would argue that one, the springs, obviously, that you pointed out, are working best. And then the pumps are actually pumping up the fish, because the fish are still moving along enough to be fished by locals who park on the banks and fish off the banks and catch them. And two, if they weren't so worried about predators, they probably wouldn't be in the ponds anyways. So there's a lot of reasonable conversations we could have here that could actually help us move water our direction. There's not a lot of reasonable people in Sacramento right now.
Say amen to that.
The problem I see with, I mean, I'm a newcomer. I just got started, but I mean, I've always had my opinion on the way things are always went. But, the mandates, especially the unfunded mandates that come down to us, you know, we have people that don't have their budgets in order or aren't doing things efficiently. And then they turn around and they mandate something on a town like this that is taking the time to try to do things right. This doesn't seem very fair at all. It doesn't seem very fair at all. And it almost seems like they look at a place like this that's doing it right as someplace, you know, that they could try to get their little hands on and try to tap it if they could. So that's what's frustrating. I work on a farm too, and just a 2,000-acre farm, but yeah, we were already told, you know, our water requirements aren't going to be very much. And we're going to get started, you know, getting used to the idea of firing up the pumps.
And that's going to be a strain on not just the farm financially, but also on our groundwater and our grid, because the amount of pumping requires a lot of electricity. And we saw what happened last summer when it got real hot.
It's a domino effect.
It has a negative impact on everyone.
You know,
But we need to feed folks, and we also need to employ folks, and that's the main source of income here.
So you're frustrated too?
We're all frustrated, that's why we get involved.
That's right. That's
yeah.
right.
How about smaller projects that would make an impact that would be more locally able to do? Is there anything like that?
Well, you know, obviously, there's always resources out there for water banking, underground water banking. Obviously, here in Kern County, the Kern Water Bank is a large example of that. There's also a lot of smaller examples. Working with your local GSA probably have a good avenue there to know exactly what you need to do to make up for your limitations and try to keep as much ground productive, being productive. But yeah, there's always resources out there for. We just have to make sure that you apply for and work with the right agency to get a grant or whatever you need to work. Sometimes you can work with the water district or a group of farmers, like I've seen some, and they'll apply for those types of things. But there's also even much smaller down at the farm level. We can work with the RCS and others for grants to be able to do things like subsurface drip or drip in general, making sure your pump's more efficient, putting VFD variable speed so that or soft start, so it's not so hard on the pump itself, keeping your equipment in better shape. Obviously, that will have an impact on the grid. There's a lot of avenues of different things we can do and different ways we can approach that. But also making sure that we have access to systems that help us keep clean water for our communities. And I know Shopper has been very successful and done a great job for a lot of communities around here that are in desperate need, or even folks from their own individual wells who are really struggling as well.
You know what I saw, this is kind of interesting, you know, I saw driving along on Santa Fe, which is along the railroad track, and they were sort of Shopper. They had these rolls of hoses, cable, I mean, I didn't stop and look at it. Well, now yesterday I noticed they had them all rolled out, and it's like they have a little sprinkler at the end of it. Have you seen these at all? And they sprinkle the smaller area. Is that maybe another way that you get the best use of water?
Where is this?
It's not too far out of Shafter here as you go out.
But it's going next to a field or?
Yes,
Drip
They had
lines
tape.
and fan jets.
Oh, it's fan
What is
jets
it?
like almonds?
They're called fan jets, and they'll
yeah.
spray a certain area, or they have drip lines that drip.
Well, they had taken the orchard out, and I'm assuming they're getting ready to replant it, and that's what they're watering out there now. But won't they leave it in there?
Yeah.
So it is more water saving, or what is it?
It's putting the water where you want it. So
Exactly,
if
so
you
you
want it
don't
in a
waste
certain area and you want to put out so much of it, and I think we still put out the same amount of water as flood irrigating if you let it run long enough. But the thing is that now you're not flooding the whole tract, you're just
Yeah,
putting
it's-
the
It's on the
water.
right-hand side.
Yeah. It's really pretty neat. It looks nice just to drive by and see it.
Becomes a big problem for coyotes and gophers and squirrels and sometimes even birds like to chew those up.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's a lot of maintenance along the road as well. But yes, there is a water savings. Another concern is when you flood irrigate, you're letting the water chase, or let the plant, the tree chase the water down. That helps the root zone grow down. And those types of facilities are feeding just enough water from the top. A lot of times the trees won't establish the strong roots and the winds will take them down a lot easier than they would otherwise.
What do you call it? Something fan?
They're called fan jets,
Fan?
and then the other one would be a drip line.
And subsurface ones like, kind of like, where they actually bury 8 inches to 12 inches underground. And it allows, well, some people are doing corn and wheat and alfalfa with that. And it works really nice. It just, it's a different way of doing it, where they're actually just burying, so you can't actually see the line. Gophers still attack them, so they're constant repair. What's the situation here with folks in the utilities?
Which utilities? Power?
I mean, power, sewage, water, how are folks handling that? I assume the city supplies something.
We do our utilities, sewer, water, refuse. We're probably carrying about 200,000,
What would a normal situation be?
about 100.
So it's,
So we're about 300 right now, and what we're carrying,
also it's triple.
yes.
Yeah.
We still continue to bill, we have some people that have been paying, but for the most part, we're still kind of.
We had a few problems hit us all at the same time. COVID didn't help, but we ended up with the ransomware issue too. And so we had a cyber attack on our system, so we had to shut everything down for a while.
Someone,
So there was a lot that hit us all at the same time, and then once you're able to recover from that and put it back online, it doesn't help the situation with COVID being out there and people not getting rid of it. So there was a lot in this.
and that's obviously something that we need to talk about moving forward. And when they talk about other COVID relief packages or how the dollars are going to be spent, even on the one that was just passed. And that's one that's going to put a lot of pressure on some of these communities. I talked to one that's already 5 times their normal number. Yeah.
Well, ours could go up depending on, because you can't really go after them as easily as you could before. I mean, is that just California law? Yeah, see, I mean, you just said it too, about California. I mean, that's another one that's gonna get. And eventually, I believe, and I'm saying this publicly, but I believe that when some of these people begin to realize the costs that are happening to them, they're gonna get very upset. Because they're gonna have to have a say in it. I mean, this kind of governing should change, it needs to stop. Because it's like they're making decisions before they think. They don't work through any detail.
Especially in a state the size of California,
Yes.
where we are very, very diverse. I would never put Schefter or Wasco or Arnold Lamont in the same category as San Francisco, LA, Orange County, San Diego. I mean, we're obviously very different types of communities.
Right.
I'm a big fan of local control. I'd rather you guys make more decisions about how to
Well,
operate.
we'd like to, but then look at what's happened. They come right into the valley and they're not helping us. Not helping us at all.
You take a one-size approach. Is the administration looking to support or fund high-speed rail?
So, I haven't seen it in their budget yet, but they publicly said that they want to support more high-speed rail without specifically mentioning California. But we know that they are a fan of the project, and obviously our vice president is from California, so we fully expect that they will try to send some money this way.
See, and I saw this morning that Buttigieg is going with what Biden is supporting and saying that they will see dollars come this way.
Did they specifically mention California?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I've been on the road all day. so it's-
Well, and I knew that that was going to come because everyone was waiting for the elections to see what got in. The money was more likely to come, but yes, that's what they have.
How's the relationship with high-speed rail?
Ours,
Yes.
well, I don't like what our decision is because I believe it's going to be so many years down the road to find the north and south connected and it doesn't really fit the valley because we can't have public transportation like we do over here. And so they're gonna put this certain amount of valid track, Gabriel and I was talking about it too. And we're gonna be left with this wall that they're gonna put up, they're gonna mount it all through town. So we have a tunnel coming through Shafter Avenue, Central Avenue, and Laredo. And yet, we're not gonna see from this side to that side, it's gonna be blocked off. I don't like it. And I know our citizens aren't gonna like it.
You know, I've heard from a lot of our community who struggle. Some further north who have been going a little bit longer are in a little bit different position, but they've been fighting this thing for a number of years. A lot of frustration. And that was one of the things with high-speed rail in general was, I didn't feel like there was honest up front about the structure, about where it's going to be, the alignments, all the different stuff. Much less planning how they're going to actually operate, what they're going to charge people.
Yes.
Especially in an area like this, in the 21st Congressional District, median income is in the low 40,000s. And without knowing exactly what it was going to cost to ride it, I think they were promised a lot of people, something that a lot would be able to afford.
That's right.
It's my understanding that it's not gonna be a commuter. I mean, it's not a commuter train, it's more for, like you would jump on a plane, but it's gonna be hard to compete when the airline reestablishes its service. I was in Gilroy at City Manager, there, you can fly to San Jose to LAX for less than $100 and probably less time than you would a high-speed rail. And high-speed rail is gonna charge $100 plus. It just doesn't, 30-minute flight from San Jose to LAX, and you're talking about 2.5-hour drive from LA to the Bay Area.
Well, there are people who use Amtrak, but losing the Wasco station, which is demolished, Corcoran losing their station, Hanford, they're probably going to get the stop for high-speed rail there between Hanford and side. But here in this community right here, they're going to miss out on those who actually use it. And the thing with transportation is not believe any transportation ever really pays for itself.
No.
But making sure that you spend taxpayer money as efficiently as possible, making sure they're the right investment for, and the responsible investment is important. And sadly, this one is showing a lot of promise.
I don't know if you've ever heard this, but I don't oppose rail, because I think we do need to get people out of cars in our state. But because we're so spread out, and you look at what we're gonna deal with, once again, we don't fit the same mold as we do north and south, you know that.
Mhm.
And so what they're gonna deem on us, even in housing, I mean, you can go on and on with so many of the topics, and it just doesn't fit us, and I wanna say, leave us alone, get out of here.
Well, and if they had taken those dollars and actually just invested in Amtrak and made it more like
Yes.
Casella, did that 140, 150 mile an hour deal that they do on the East Coast that a lot of people are happy with, probably would have been a smarter start.
They
for
can
this.
still change.
Well, when they first passed that bond, they put in there that it had to do a certain mile per hour, I forget the exact number, 200, and then it had to do LA and San Francisco at a certain amount of time. They've obviously broken a lot of the promises made in that bond, but it would have been a good start to at least try to, if they're going to break any, make sure that it was an efficient system that continued to serve as many communities as possible. But to just shut down our existing stops to fly by and build walls dividing our communities wasn't a good start.
So Bakersfield Station should be okay, and so should Fresno,
Well, they're supposed to get new stations for the high-speed rail, and
but not Amtrak. That's why I was reading
they're not giving us a lot of information. I've only been getting a lot of my information directly from some of the local electeds. Sounds like some communities are being promised stops when high-speed rail is ultimately built. First, they'll probably put a slower Amtrak train on it with the ability to stop at some, maybe even Wasco, but they're not actually building a building for anything. But I don't believe it's a long-term commitment.
Well, I wouldn't mind writing it, that's not the issue. I mean, and you know what, I think it's important to stop the cars. I mean, it's still gonna cost, but I do think that's important. I think rail is important, but we need to have it in a way that doesn't cost a fortune, and this has gone beyond a fortune.
Well, especially when you've got things like our airports seem to be expanding. Fresno has now got Southwest coming in, and Bakersfield obviously has the ability
Yeah.
to continue to expand as long as the market is there. And high-speed rail, which I actually like the idea, I'm a fan of the concept, I just don't know if this is the right way to do it.
That's right.
Well, I don't know.
Even today at lunch, I was talking to two farmers, and it's the same way. they don't want to see any rail because of the cost, but I said, think of the future, and I think it is important for the future, it really is.
They should have the path to get over the mountains too.
Well, they didn't even come through the valley. You know, we advocated they should have gone right along I-5.
They could have connected Bakersfield over, the grapevine, or they could have connected us, into the Bay Area. And then they could have built rail in areas that have no rail to start, and then connected us and given us an option instead of shutting down existing rail.
There wasn't, the plan wasn't there.
No, I still don't believe the plan is there.
No.
I always thought the 99 corridor was the best route. I mean, if you're not stopping in these small cities, why are you going right through the middle of them?
So that
So,
was the other option too, yes, to stay right along the tracks that were already there.
You know,
so there's a lot of different things that happened at that point. Earlier on, in my time in office, I've asked that question quite a few times. And one of the answers that I received from both the high-speed rail administration or authority was that the existing corridors, which was a commitment under the original bond that was passed, that they would follow along the existing corridor. But then after it passed, their comments were, existing corridors are not straight enough to go that fast. But when you look at the alignment, especially from an aerial shot, it is, I think, just as windy as a lot of our existing corridors, so that argument to me doesn't make sense. Honestly, I'm not an engineer or an expert on this, I'm just looking at it as a guy driving down the road and looking at what they put up. But that was the reason why they didn't follow, at least that's what they told me. Couldn't follow existing corridors, even though we promised we would, because they were too windy. But there was also a lot of community pulling. I mean, Fresno honestly wanted the alignment to go to the city of Fresno. Visalia was asking for it to come closer to them. And Highway 5 is pretty far out there.
yeah, but like Catherine mentioned earlier, you know, it's gonna be elevated coming right through the middle of town. And it's, you know, I don't know what it's gonna look like, but it's gonna be a block wall, or it's gonna be in stilts or what.
No, it's not stilts, it's dirt. It's all dirt that they're bringing and build it up the mountain.
I've never been a big fan of it.
No.
So the question is, can you do anything about it?
And then,
Or is it already spilled milk that we can't pick up?
we have to keep talking.
No, I mean, as far as changing the route, they're not gonna get up and they're not gonna move the dirt, but making sure they're holding accountable with our local community so they do as little damage as possible and try to get as much benefit of it as possible, I think is mainly my point of view of where to go. As far as the dollars, if the dollars come from the federal side, I really hope that I can support on making sure that if those dollars do go to the high school route, we can hold them accountable for how those dollars are spent. And making sure that they're doing their due diligence to remedy any type of inconvenience or property destruction that they've done. And that's one of the things I've heard from a lot of folks. And honestly, I think Kings County has been dealing with it for a number of years. But here in Kern County, a lot of folks who are now starting to be impacted by the alignment, whether it's due to their businesses, access to their business, is a real problem, and that all has to be remedied.
I think when the time comes when they start doing the last piece of extension from Shafter or from Wasco to Bakersfield, that's when we're gonna have to stay close to you because we've already made an agreement with them. So the thing is just making sure that they stay with the agreement. And for you, any kind of power you may have to making sure that we'll stay with the agreement.
No, I'm happy to work with you, and be a voice for you.
I read in the paper about Wasco, saying that they were living up to, you know, all the promises that they had made them, and they were, you know, upset about that. I guess about the labor camp and removal of it, and there being the next charge with all the asbestos in there, and they didn't want to pay it. I guess they ended up coming back and saying okay that they would. But I know Wasco wasn't happy there for a while. They're still waiting on it.
For a city the size of Wasco, a hit like that, $8 to $10 million, to clean that mess up is honestly something that Wasco would not be able to do. But the drain on resources has been a huge problem. Obviously, the local business is dealing with criminals living in that abandoned, 100 building, 200 unit, 225 unit facility. And it's just amazing there. And our law enforcement, our sheriff's deputies have to go in there chasing criminals in the dark, not knowing that as well as the people who live there. it was obviously a big danger for our guys, but also a huge issue for the local community, and it attracts an element that obviously they don't want to have to deal with. And so the facility has to be taken down. And that goes along with when high speed rail has an impact on a community, they have to remedy that to make it as close to as possible the way they found it.
Well, it's been in the press, you know, I saw your letters and they've done as best they can over there. And it's, nobody likes to have to do anything.
I think one of the issues we've had is the inconsistency of leadership.
Mhm.
We're on the third CEO, I think, and then even at the regional level, I think we're on the third or fourth regional director. And the person they have in right now, it's interim, the person they had in before, I think, is interim as well. So that's been an issue in terms of consistency.
It's an understandable position, especially with the way the project's being run. And again, no plan for the future, it would be a difficult one to be in charge of.
Well, yeah, from the start, they didn't know what they went into. I serve on the policy committee in the valley, and some of the people, because we go all the way up to Stockton, into 8 counties, and some of the ones up in the higher north area supported 100%. And so we went to a meeting in Sacramento, and when Kern spoke up and said that, you know, wasn't doing any justice for us over here, it wasn't received well by our committee because we spoke up. And I think that's totally wrong. We have a right to still speak up and say, and we did it with Chairman Kelly. You know, and we still have to do that. We still have, I mean, we're elected for that reason. We still have to represent the people. And that was wrong for Stockton and some of those others up there to do that.
See, that's the issue. Even some of the locals that I've met with who are struggling with high-speed rail, were actually folks who are vocal in support and voted for and told the high-speed rail when they started negotiating with them, were supporters of the project. And obviously, we don't want to make this a bad situation for you, so work together. And these folks are not as supportive as they once were.
That's right. That's right.
And it's frustrating because I've run across that on many different fronts. I mean, honestly, water is one of those. And I even had situations where we're dealing with members of Congress from around the state and other parts of the country who should be aligned with us because they rely on a lot, especially here in the state of California, the same water supply as we do. But a lot of times they won't do what I believe is right, and what a lot of their constituents probably know is right for political reasons.
Yeah.
Just kind of regarding oil, so it's my understanding the Keystone Project's been put on hold. Kern County obviously is, you know, oil driven, it's one of the economic bases. Kind of legislation, is that going to stay the way it is with suspense and impacts to the oil industry, particularly in the area?
So specific to the Keystone Pipeline, I mean, obviously that was something President Biden did in the very beginning. I actually think it was a safer, more economical way of moving oil and keeping a lot of American jobs. So I think it was a mistake, but he did decide to move that direction. But obviously not having the ability to move oil more efficiently, the oil price here in the Central Valley have actually gone up a little bit. And so I think it's been a little bit more helpful for some of our local guys, but the state of California is obviously not going to be very friendly moving forward with a lot of permitting. And I think that we in the United States, especially the state of California, have to live by some of the strictest regulations. When drilling, when operating, if there's a safe place to get oil, it's here. But,
One of the things I worry about is SB 1000, environmental justice. What is it called?
Yeah, environmental justice.
Yeah, environmental justice is, has a lot of restrictions that they want to put on agriculture and on oil. That's right where we're at.
that's a state building, so
Yeah.
I need to look that one up.
Oh, yeah, it's really strong because it's stopped our element from moving forward for the environmentalists.
It's, and they want to restrict, traffic flow through town, drilling sites, farming, pesticide use and all that.
Or even our economic development. They don't want to do that either.
This is where we're at. So that's one of the things, one of the challenges, that the city's been looking into, trying to comply with everything that they're going to want us to comply with. The other thing too is, our initial concern is what's going on out the border. How is that going to affect everything, how much money is going to be thrown towards that, to accommodate what's going on, and how is that going to impact everybody?
The border is obviously a huge concern, and if you look into what's going on there, it's not that these folks are actually trying to sneak past the border, across the border, they're turning themselves in, and they're using our asylum process. And that comes from one thing only, it's the message that the president sent out on the asylum process, and welcoming these folks. And we have an asylum process for a good reason, is to help people who are in dangerous situations in their country, but to encourage it to a point where people are just showing up with or without their children, sometimes just their children. And some of the stories you hear about these caravans, parents knowing that their daughters are going to be assaulted on the way here. And obviously some of the countries they travel through are pretty dangerous. It's not the way that we're supposed to do this, and it's obviously not the safest way. So I obviously think that the president needs to step up. I really think that our vice president needs to go down and actually see the border. I spent a lot of time on the border. I haven't been there yet this year, but I've been down there where they were building a new wall, where there were old walls, areas that there were no walls. I've actually repelled with some deer captains who wanted the tunnels to actually go out and see some of the tunnels that they move drugs through. I crossed the border, walked the lines of the folks that were coming here to come in the legal way through the process. I walked in between all the cars as they were going through their process for inspection. Then I spent some time with USDA down there, watching as they inspect commodities and other products coming across their border. And it's a complicated issue because we have to have a good, strong way of knowing who people are and why they're coming and where their backgrounds are. But we also have to have a process to make sure that that trucks are inspected properly, because they don't have the ability to do as much as we would like them to do. And the guys there on the border that are doing the job have a huge task, and it's complicated more by a lot of folks showing up and asking for asylum.
So where do you see the future of that going?
I think the pressure is going to build, and the president's going to have to do something, because he can't live with this mess that he's created. And this is not a good situation to be in.
Are we getting close to that?
I hope so. And the fact that our vice president isn't going down there yet tells me that she's afraid of the optics of being the front person of a bad situation.
Mm-hmm.
If they were doing things well, she would be front and center doing her press conferences right in us on the field facility. They're doing a great job, and she's obviously not doing that.
It almost seems like they're just ignoring and just turning the other cheek and not even worrying about the criticism that's coming their way.
Yeah, and that's a bad strategy. This one, I think, requires them to be very vocal. Because the federal government for years, especially into the Northern Triangle, has spent $600, $700, sometimes $800 billion into some of those communities. And we try to work with NGOs and others to try to get those resources into communities, make sure they have after-school programs. And we do a lot of stuff in a lot of those communities. And these are countries down there that struggle with gangs, they struggle with drugs, they struggle with a lot of stuff. And I think the U.S. is trying to be a good partner there and try to do a lot. But it is difficult in countries like that because of the corruption. But what do they do with the money? And it has to be a good use of your taxpayer money to make sure it's done in a way that's effective, but also address the situation. So the situation down there is dangerous. And some of the problems are coming up here. I mean, the MS-13 situation in Fresno County, we had a community that was really struggling a number of years ago. They did a big sweep a number of years ago, cleaned up a lot, but it started to build back up. And a lot of these folks who come from those regions, better prepared, better understanding of the local issues that we deal with, and how to better blend in so that they're not as noticeable, but continue to be a law enforcement issue for us. And I hope, again, our resources, our prison system, our immigration services, and they end up being a pretty bad situation for us.
So you refer more to the Central American countries, huh?
So, and I haven't seen the updated numbers, but over the last few years that I've seen, the people that are doing playing the silent tend to be more outdoors, less outdoor, and not so much from Mexico.
You're wrong. Sad, it is a sad deal.
How big of a defund the police issue is in California? Is it a lot of cities or is it just a couple?
I mean, I feel like they're backing off a little bit. I don't see as much at the federal level. State level, I haven't followed as closely. But at least from our local community perspective, the recruitment has been a real bad situation. And I assume it's in the same here in Chapter, where talking to police chiefs and talking to sheriffs, the comments have been that they're struggling to find people who want to get into law enforcement because of that rap. And so it's making that more and more difficult to hire folks. And as you well know, we really need this law enforcement here because the state's done a job on letting people out of prison and making our situation much worse. And the drugs continue to become a bigger and bigger problem. Homeless situations is a much larger problem than it's been in a long time. And all those tied up resources, especially law enforcement. And I mean, there were elements of the conversation I actually agreed with. I think we do need to do more for behavioral health. We need to spend some resources there for a lot of these folks who really struggle. And maybe arresting them all the time isn't the best solution, but you have to have something there. And taking money away from law enforcement, I believe, is a mistake. But making sure the resources there to help those who need the assistance on the behavioral health side is something that competition needs to be had. The drug side is a huge problem. I mean, folks who do not want to get fed, do not want to get treated, because we have nowhere to keep them in a home or some sort of treatment facility, that they have to make a decision on their own, go into a facility, stay there, and be treated. And the day that the urge comes back, if they want to get back on drugs, they can walk out the door. And that takes a strong willpower, a strong community to be able to encourage people to stay in situations they don't want to be a part of. And they probably got some strong urges pulling them away. And drug addiction is a huge problem, and it seems to be getting a lot worse.
Well, it leads to the mental issue. That one's really tough.
And police officers have a lot going on, as it is right now with the amount of folks that are let out of the prison system. To ask them to try to become behavioral health specialists is,
Oh, they're being required, aren't they? Yeah, they're required.
so it's a real problem. And so I think we're asking too much of them. I think we need help, but obviously the funding was not the right approach. I mean, anyone that's stretched thin and the way they work is going to be stressed.
Do you follow our policing setup in here?
I'm sorry?
Do you follow us and what we have in safety for Chapter?
I don't follow Chapter specifically.
No, well, we're doing very well. It's not a kept secret because we definitely, others know about it, and yet it's most important that we maintain that. You know, it's required.
No, understand.
Anyway, you want to have a few more minutes? I don't know if you heard this from some of the other smaller cities, but with the infrastructure bill that's going to be coming, oftentimes already we have to CEQA and then throw NEPA in there. Just makes the project almost infeasible, right? Just more of a point of consideration is there's a way to, I doubt it, but there's a way to lessen the NEPA requirement of some of these infrastructure projects, because even though we're shovel ready, when we throw in CEQA and NEPA in there for environmental review and stuff like that, it just ties up the project, and it just makes it completely infeasible, especially when you have to mitigate certain measures.
No, it's a very good point. Obviously, doubling up regulation and forcing you to jump through the same loop on two different organizations, maybe draft it up in different ways. I feel like if one side's going to do the regulatory front, allow them to do it, and allow you guys to move forward. And it makes sense for the community. It makes sense from the taxpayer savings perspective.
Right.
I agree.
And then just lastly, with corporate tax, our businesses are already hurting or struggling after this whole COVID situation. I think anything to not impose higher taxes on our businesses, I think we go a long way.
So when that legislation was signed into law in 2017, one of the things that the focus of it was to make sure that we lower the cost of doing business in the United States so that we would be competitive. We struggle to attract jobs and investment here on a lot of different fronts. Making sure we have good trade policy, and making sure that we have enough trade agreements with different countries, because obviously if you're a multinational organization, you want to be in a position to trade with as many countries as possible. Making sure that our cost of doing business, and there's going to be cost of doing business in the US because we obviously have a strict regulatory process to make sure we do a good job for our environment. But you include the cost of trade agreements, the cost of the regulatory process, and on top of that, corporate tax. It just makes it harder and harder for us to attract those businesses, and I completely agree. We've got to make sure we keep costs low and continue to make the US a great place to invest.
Where are you headed to now?
And I've only
Ooh,
started at County North and worked my way up.
okay.
We're gonna start seeing some relief from COVID pressure from the federal level. Not financial relief, just relief, the pressures that are placed with legislation, wearing masks, social distancing.
I mean, I think a lot of that is your state. The federal side, which again, I'm a local control guy, I feel like the Fed shouldn't be in that position. I think the Feds are in the best position to help coordinate resources, make sure that folks are there, make sure that the research is there. And I think that the vaccine being developed as quickly as it was is important. But as we get closer down to people on the ground, I like the idea of city councils and supervisors making more decisions than anyone else, especially in a state like California, 40 million people. And such a big state to expect them to pass blanket regulations for a whole state when we're so diverse.
See, and we did that. I don't know if you caught what I said earlier, but we did do that. We always talked about Shafter being independent of having to go out beyond California. And then it all changed, we've got to change the government. Now they're in our business.
I'm frustrated with it as well.
Well, I'm totally frustrated. I have friends that move out, and I'm going, well, I don't know that I'm ready to move out, but it's disgusting.
I saw only one U-Haul van, which surprised me to see a U-Haul van in a parking lot of a U-Haul facility. Normally I hear that they're
Full.
all out of state and paying a fee to bring them back to be able to be used. That's a bad sign. Well, thank you very much for the help. Yes, sir.
Last question. What is your opinion and what is being done about the homeless problem?
So, as far as the federal side, I think we've got to do more. There's so much place involved. I think we've got to do more as far as the university. I've talked to some of the behavioral health facilities, looking for reimbursement to make sure that some people who want to get treated for whatever policy they have the ability to continue to get treated so they don't end up in a situation where they become homeless. I think that's going to play a role. As far as HUD and other programs, we're looking at using different dollars for community development to allow for some housing for these folks. You've got to have a situation where these folks have somewhere to go and the ability to get treated. Because for them just to live on the street and run from one community to the next isn't the solution. Obviously in the state of California, you can't put them in prison or in jail because they talked about the room, a lot of the rules have changed. So I believe that we've got to find that place and the ability to get them treated. And that's something that the federal government is working on through one program. The treatment part is one that I'd like to work on a little bit more and see if there's an opportunity there.
Because just by looking at it, doesn't seem like there's anything of much being done, and it seems like the problem's getting worse.
Oh, I absolutely believe it's getting worse. And the majority of, there's a lot of behavioral health issues there. So there's, I think, it's like 95% of it is drug related, and they have very defined that. And so it's gonna take a little bit of both, but it has to, you've gotta have both a place to go to get treated and the ability to get treated. And then we've gotta have those jobs for them to be able to get back on their feet.
Well, EJ doesn't want jobs. I asked him, they have no answers. They have no answers. What are you gonna do for a job?
Environmental justice.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
She circled back to this SB 1000.
no, that's, they don't have an answer. When I asked them, what are you gonna do for a job? Nothing.
Yeah, well, we can push from the federal side and try to alleviate the best we can, but we have states and people on a lot of these fronts.
Well, I told Cody that that's what you need to do. You need to really show our area the good things that you can work on and the good things that you can get results on. Because we gotta get the votes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can we adjourn?
Yes.
Make a motion to adjourn.
A second.
We have a motion and a second, all in favor, say aye. Aye, opposed, no, we are adjourned.
Thank you very much for the time today.
Thank you. Cody, you can call us anytime.
Okay, yes, thank you.